Hello, students, and welcome to today's lecture with me, Professor William Wright, over Chapter 15 of Living with Art by Mark Getlein. So I'll just go ahead and jump straight to the slides today. Like I said, we're going back to Chapter 15. And this follows the chapter about the ancient Mediterranean world and Rome. And I guess the Roman Empire at its peak was kind of what we talked about. And so chapter 15 picks that up as the Roman Empire is actually sort of coming apart at the seams. Okay. And that's what we're going to cover today with this chapter. So, yeah, I think we're good to go. Let me double check, be sure things are working well. Yep, good to go. Okay, so chapter 15, just to kind of hit some highlights. So first off, yes, this picks up as Rome is disintegrating. Rome at the point, if you watch the full video on the entire history of Rome, which was an extra little video after my slides on Rome, it talks about how we go through history. Rome reaches its peak about 100 AD and then slowly starts to disintegrate from there. And at two different points, it splits into two different Roman empires. It splits and then rejoins and then splits again. And it typically splits along an east-west sort of setup. And, at different times, it's more like there's just two popes or two Roman emperors versus like actually two different sides of Europe. But in any case, towards the end of the Roman Empire, it has pretty much fully split, and the western portion of Rome becomes Europe, Western and Northern Europe, and then it looks like a collection of independent, often warring kingdoms that are just united by the common religious culture of Christianity. And basically that's why we often track Christianity as a part of the history of Europe, because that's what eventually brings it all together. It's all these different people groups that are united once they have Catholicism bring Christianity to them. But the eastern half of Rome at the end actually is centered around Constantinople, and it becomes the Byzantine Empire, which is a Christianized continuation of the much diminished Roman Empire in the regions of Greece and modern-day Turkey. So yeah, Greece and then Asia Minor become the Byzantine Empire. And really it's kind of interesting because Rome as a city is in Europe, but the city of Rome kind of disintegrates and turns into Europe as the Western Empire falls, and Rome, the empire, actually is the eastern half, right? So the Roman Empire, as of like 8 or 900, actually is basically doesn't even include Rome. But we'll talk more about that in a second. But yeah, it's more the areas of Greece and modern day Turkey. So, and then of course, in the Near East or Central Asia, which is Egypt, which includes, Saudi Arabia and I guess the Semitic countries, as well as Egypt, North Africa, and most of Spain, they, become the heartland of another religion, Islam, which we cover in another chapter. Now, here's a quick timeline. I love timelines and I love maps. I'm sorry if you guys don't, but they're handy. Just walking through, I'll try not to read every one of these. But as I said, Christianity becomes something that we can orient a lot of our history around. And because of its cultural cachet, it's always a focus of the development of Western civilization because of the role that Catholicism played. Also, as I've talked about before, it's important that we understand that the whole timeline thing, like BC and AD, those are created by the Christian church, created by Catholicism. And that is why in that timeline, everything before Jesus is a countdown to Jesus, and everything after Jesus, is the after Jesus part. And as I talked about in other chapters, BC, which we basically say is like before Christ, and then AD, Anno Domini, which means after Christ, we have in the modern era realized that we don't want all of our history to necessarily be that Christianized. We're trying to kind of, make it where it doesn't feel like that's all that history has to offer, and yet we don't want to change all the years that things happen. So rather than totally coming up with a whole new timing system, what we've done is called BC has now turned into BCE, which means before Common Era, and then CE is what used to be called AD. Now, of course, I'm bad about switching them back and forth, but CE means Common Era, and that's basically AD. But BC is now BCE, and it's important to know though, everybody needs to realize that everybody walking around before Jesus came around, they didn't say like, oh man, it's the year 54 and it's going to be 53 next year. Like, I wonder what's going to happen when we hit zero. Like, no, they had their own timelines. They had their own discussion and their own ways of setting up their time. And lots of countries like and cultures still do that in the world. Not everything is beholden to our ADBC setup of time. And actually, as a consequence of some of like our understanding of better technology, we've actually figured out that Jesus wasn't even really born in zero. He was actually born in somewhere between 6 and 4 BC. And in any case, if you watch the video, you know that Jesus, when he is born, is actually considered Roman, right? In a way, he's not a actual from Rome Roman citizen, but he is a citizen of the Roman Empire as a whole. And he is born in Bethlehem during the reign of the Roman Emperor Augustus. And then it takes the starting place of the presumed Jesus birth, calling it year 1. And it was, 6th century calendar makers realized they were wrong. Basically, they hadn't factored in the leap year thing. And so that's when they figured out like, oh, heck, that he was actually born 4 to 6 years before zero. But in any case, Augustus, as a Rome, we know the story of Jesus. He's crucified, and basically the Romans leave it up to the religious courts, and he has his whole story, and it plants the seed that later becomes Christianity. But Rome keeps going on its own, and Augustus, he spans that gap of BC to AD. He lasts 40 years. He lasts much longer than his uncle Julius. But in any case, he sets up the early Roman Empire. Julius Caesar he shifted Rome from being a republic to being an empire, but then Augustus really set up the Roman Empire to be what it was. But in 40 CE is the first time we hear the term Christian used to designate followers of Christ. We know Jesus dies around 30 CE, so about 10 years after that, we start hearing of Christians who were his followers. The New Testament is written about 70 to 80 CE. Christianity becomes its own group. It's not just like a special group of Jewish people or people practicing Judaism. They make their own. And then it's mostly persecution of Christians by multiple emperors you see there. And then it's in 300 that the Edict of Milan makes it legal to be Christian. Okay. And then that's when everything changes. Okay. Again, if you want to hear more in detail about that history before Christianity, that video on Rome in 20 minutes is like pretty cool. I posted it, or it's a part of my last slideshow about Rome. But in any case, after the Edict of Milan and Constantine being the emperor, he sees this vision of Christ on the cross before battle, and then he wins the battle. So he says, you know what, not only is Christianity legal, it's like kind of the religion. And he moves the capital to Constantinople, which is modern day Istanbul, and that's what sets up the Eastern Empire. In any case, the Bible is written in the 4th and 5th centuries CE. Then the Roman Empire, it actually during that time splits in 95, and then in 410, the fall of Rome happens, and that's when we see the Western Empire collapse, and the Eastern half becomes the Byzantine Empire, or like basically what's left. 476 BC is when we see the last like Roman emperor dethroned, and his name's Romulus, which is cool, like interesting because that's the first one too. But in any case, the Christian church also splits about 500 years after that, and we see Eastern and Western Christianity. And actually, most of people in the Western world don't even realize there's an entire Eastern half of the practices of Christianity that's totally different from that we practice here. But in any case, that's when the Byzantine Empire is set up, which later falls to Turks. Okay, sorry, I did end up reading all of that because, again, like I said, I enjoy it. But you could have fast forwarded if you needed to. But in any case, so setting that up after the story of Jesus, as Rome is developing, we need to talk about the culture of Christianity developing. And one thing that's good to know is that, or it's a common story, is how early Christians actually practiced in catacombs. and they did, to an extent, they did have certain religious get-togethers, but they also practiced in homes of their followers and things like that. But in any case, what catacombs are these places where we do see some of the first Christian art, but they're subterranean passageways and chambers designed as basically cemeteries. They're underground cemeteries where we store bodies after they've passed. Now, Roman law protects all underground cemeteries and declares burial rights inviolable, which means that basically Roman Roman law enforcement and rulers, they can't go into catacombs and like persecute people, basically. So the Christians knew to an extent that if they went down there and practiced their religious ceremonies and did their burial rites as like Christian and other religious ceremonies in catacombs, they would actually be protected. So they were hiding from persecution, but they were also, it was already kind of set up as a place for religious things to happen. But then bonus points, Rome didn't like go seek them out there. Now they persecuted them in all kinds of other places. But when Christianity was being preached in Rome by Peter and Paul, by the time we get the epistles and stuff, there already existed catacombs. And so they just, pagan and Jewish catacombs were used, became Christian, or just were used to stay safe as Christians. But in any case, these underground places are where we see some of the earliest art of Christianity, the stories of the Bible, with now this focus on the line of David that becomes Jesus and those sort of things. We see some characters, from the Bible presented in this new sort of Christian way, this focus on the life of Jesus of Nazareth and John the Baptist and these kind of stories. We start to see their art in the catacombs. And again, this is one of the first places we see it. And again, it's not defiled by Roman law, because it's protected by the inviolable burial rights. In any case, we see in Greek areas, or at least in Eastern areas, this is part of the Byzantine Empire. There's two things you should know here. Number one is that they're mosaic rather than fresco, right? So fresco is a kind of Western European, it's really like a Latin type of artwork, versus mosaics are a little more common in the East, right? That's just a small thing. Mosaics being the small tesserae of different color pieces, small pieces. That's what the tesserae are, set up to look like a painting rather than actual painted pigment. But the other thing you should see here is this is actually supposed to be an image of Christ, but he's represented as Helios, right? The god of the sun. So there's this like ancient pull of like Greek culture, but like transposing Jesus over that. And that's actually something we see the Christian church do a lot. It happens in Celtic culture. It happens in Viking culture or Scandinavian culture. But in any case, yeah, we see some of the first images of Jesus, as sort of the Godhead or whatever you want to call him in these images. Now, there are different images that start to become synonymous with Christian practices, including, of course, the cross, right? Because that's central to the story of Jesus. We have the really, equilateral Greek cross, the typical Latin cross, which is the cross as we know it. There's the Celtic cross, which is really something that comes along later, and there's no, as far as I understand, I'm sure there's a purpose for it, but mostly it's just that there's an extra layer, there's an extra circle around the center of the cross. The Russian Orthodox cross, I'm not sure what all the purpose is of the different lines and stuff, but we see, different types of Christianity developing. Latin and Celtic would have been Western Europe. Greek and Russian would, of course, been Eastern Orthodox. Sorry. But we also see, Greek symbols being used to talk about Jesus. We see Nika, we see Inri, which is a Latin inscription talking about Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. That's what Inri is short for. The three letters of the Greek spelling, Jesus, iota, eta, sigma. And of course it would have been Yeshua, and this is how they would have spelled that. In any case, essentially we do see some early like symbols that are oriented specifically to Jesus, and of course Jesus as the fisher of men leads to some fish imagery as well, and it says Ictus there, God's son. In any case, we start to see this is the commonplace imagery across Rome as Christianity takes center stage over Roman paganism. But then the this is essentially what most of us know now, that St. Peter's Basilica is the central kind of church around which the Vatican is built. So the original St. Peter's Basilica looked very different, and it was started in Rome. So remember, at this point, the capital of Rome is Constantinople, and yet Catholicism is already developing as this sort of Roman or European practice, while that Eastern Orthodox Christianity is developing around the capital of Constantinople. So already, before the fall of Rome and the split of Rome, you're already seeing like Western Christianity versus Eastern. But in any case, Western Christianity, the St. Peter's Basilica becomes the central church in Rome around, the birth of Catholicism. The original structure did look like this. We have drawings of it. We have diagrams and, of course, ruins. But the structure was demolished in 1506 to build the new St. Peter's Basilica, which we'll look at. That's in the middle of the Renaissance, and you'll see the great big Vatican City that we know of now. But the original was built based on that Roman basilica, right? It's actually called the St. Peter's Basilica because of that. If you remember from the chapter on Rome again, that basilica building, which was essentially like their courthouse and their public forum. It's not the forum, not like the market, but it's that building where the Senate would meet. It's their public, the courts and public offices were there in the basilica, and it's a long nave with aisles on either side. And now in the original basilica, this central aisle would have been the main place where action happened, and then I guess part number 2 here, in the original Roman Basilica would have been the aisle around which, they all looked into the center, versus in the Christian Basilica, as it develops in Christianity, there's the main aisle where, the people proceed through, and there's movement of the center of attention while everyone sits in the aisles. But then in the typically going to be in the eastern wall, you're going to see a altar is what's a little bit different about the church basilica, but it does have the same parts: the nave, aisle, apse, transept, narthex, all those things that you see. There's actually the courtyard, much like we later see in mosques as well. But really, it's all kind of based around this original Roman structure of the basilica. Okay, and now we do have a recreation of the St. Peter's Basilica that was built in Rome as well. Now that's this one here. I think this is St. Vitali in San Sabina in Rome. It's a little different, but in any case, we do know. Sorry, I keep going back and forth on these slides. We're starting to see these basilica, which again, now we have a modern term, cathedral. Also, I guess there's this arcade in front, again, similar to a mosque in later Islamic culture. But in any case, this image here, it shows this other cathedral, the Santa Sabina, again, sort of with the central nave, the apse, which is the word for the altar at this time, and then the aisles on either side. In any case, we see this becomes kind of the main plan for Western Catholic churches. Okay, that's my roundabout way of saying that, based on the basilica, but with some alterations. Now, here's the interior of Santa Sabina. And you'll notice in these pictures we see the clerestory, which is basically another word for what they call it is the clear story. It's a extra story built on top of the center aisle or the center nave that's actually just walls and lots of windows, so that we have all the lighting. Remember, there wouldn't have been electric lighting and things, and rather than have churches in the ancient world don't have a great relationship with fire, so they would have minimized the use of fire inside by having lots of windows that would have naturally lit the space. And essentially the word for that extra level of windows is the clerestory or the clear story. St. Paul's outside the wall. That's the one I was trying to remember. I think that's the recreation of the original St. Peter's Basilica, and that may be this one here. In any case, yeah, I said that wrong. But you see the clerestory, you see the structure of the cathedral or the basilica in Western society developing. Now, remember, as the Western Roman Empire is sort of developing, it's split off of the East. It's becoming what will later be Europe. The Eastern half is actually becoming kind of more the center of the Roman Empire. And Constantine, the Roman emperor, in 324 decides that, oh, actually, so it's a little later than the beginning of St. Peter's Basilica. We see Constantine moves the capital of I think it was Antioch at the time. In any case, he moves this capital to this ancient city, which he renames Constantinople, that later becomes Istanbul in what is now Turkey. And he moves the entire administration there in 330. So he decides, yeah, basically that, it's Byzantium, not Antioch. Byzantium becomes, sorry, there's a big reflected light making it difficult to read these slides. I need to move them a little bit. But in any case, Byzantium becomes Constantinople and the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, which really becomes the Roman Empire as things fall apart. As a symbol of his presence in Rome, Constantine does commission a 30-foot tall statue of himself. So since he's moved his whole court and his whole apparatus and capital to Constantinople, he doesn't want Rome to forget that they're, at this point in the 330s, still a part of the empire. So while he moves to Byzantium, later Constantinople, he builds this 30-foot tall statue. And actually, in addition to it being a symbol of everything changing because the emperor has moved to the east, it also, we can look at these portions, even just these little parts of the statue that remain, and see some things changing. First off, mainly that the facial features of Constantine here are not accurate. They're not the same naturalistic, really accurate, I've repeated the word accurate too many times now, depictions of Constantine. They're sort of stylized in a way that's a bit exaggerated and is actually already an indication of how things are going to change in terms of Byzantine art, altering that really naturalistic look of Roman and Greek antiquity. But in any case, just another timeline real quick, just to reiterate, the Roman Empire begins in 27 BC. As I guess it's really like Caesar ends the Republic and it becomes the empire when his nephew Augustus becomes emperor. And then it grows and grows, and it reaches its peak. It's 116, and at this point, it's already got all of Europe. They've already made it to Britain, which we're going to talk about later. And Diocletian divides Rome into two different parts, and then I think it actually, yeah, it does come back together at one point, but then later it splits again. So there's two emperors, then they rejoin, and then actually it becomes literally Western and Eastern empires, a little bit different. That's what we're talking about. Western one becoming Europe, Eastern one becoming Byzantine, the Byzantine Empire. And then at the same time as that is happening, the Western Empire's church, Catholicism, looks a little bit different from the Eastern church, which is Orthodox, and eventually this rift grows so severe that it splits. Remembering that it was only in 313 that Christians stopped just being killed for being Christians. It only took a few hundred years, and then they're splitting again, and then in, I guess, around 476, in the middle of all this, the Western Empire totally collapses. Rome basically sucks in the West. It just becomes just the city of Rome, and the Western Empire starts to turn into Europe. It's not brought back together again until the Ottonian Empire, which is under Charlemagne, which we'll look at later. In the East, it consistently stays, the capital of Rome remains in Byzantium, and it develops in the Byzantine Empire. And then, yeah, the Eastern Orthodox Church develops, and then the Byzantine Empire ends and collapses when the Ottoman Turks actually come in and defeat the empire in 1453. Well, yeah, that's pretty much not going to be covered here, but it actually is part of the growth of Islam and some other like Turkish empires and stuff like that. In any case, let's take a quick look at Byzantine art. So this is the Eastern Empire, right? As Rome collapses, and remember, this is basically Greece and Turkey, and a little town like right on the edge of the two is Constantinople, now Istanbul. We see their churches are a little bit different. They're not set up like the Roman Basilica. They have a specific plan called the Central Plan. Actually, to me, they're indicative of what also happens with mosques. Like the Hagia Sophia doesn't necessarily have that courtyard, but it does have a large dome, a lot like the Isfahan Mosque, and it does have the four corner bell towers, like minarets. Now, I think the minarets in this case actually may have been added later under the Ottoman Catholic or the Ottoman Islamic emperor. But in any case, we see again this like cross-cultural basilica actually mixing with Eastern culture, or the church actually mixing with Eastern culture, Persian culture, and Islamic. In any case, yeah, we see a dome. It's actually what they call the Central Plan. Here's another San Vitale in Ravenna, which is actually in Italy, but it's set up as a Byzantine chapel. And actually, if you remember, sorry, I'm back on the Hagia Sophia. It was in the other slideshow where we talked about the Hagia Sophia, and we talked about the Cordoba Mosque, and that mosque is a Byzantine chapel, not much different from the Ravenna one in some ways. That dome, that Byzantine dome, actually, is synonymous between that Cordoba Mosque, and this Ravenna church. But in any case, this Ravenna chapel, it's actually really displays how Byzantine churches have this central plan. As I said, it basically, instead of the aisle being this thing you walk down and there's the altar at the end, it's more like you walk to the center of a more radial symmetrical structure, and you look up at the dome. The inside of the dome has become the altar, and the whole idea is that it's vertical rather than horizontal. It's vertical from floor to dome, and it symbolizes, from the earth to the vault of heaven, right? And inside of these Byzantine churches, we see, again, mosaics, more so than like frescoes and paintings that we'll see later in Catholicism. We see the mosaics. They also include images of the Byzantine emperors, and in addition to the saints and the martyrs, right? There's actually like a more of a tie between the royals of Byzantine and the leaders of Byzantine and the Christian church, and so they're sometimes placed in these altars. Versus in Catholicism, they mostly use saints and the Pope, and they have their whole own like set of folks that they put inside the decoration of the churches. But in any case, these altars that are created with more of a focus upward lead to a type of altar that is kind of unique to Greek Byzantine style churches. The Pantocrator is this idea. It's a Greek ruler of all. It's often the image of Christ as divine, awe-inspiring, or maybe even a little terrifying, right? He's above you. He's large. He's now in this piece. This is more of a painting, but it's gilded, and it has all these Greek symbols and Greek. The symbols on it kind of remind me again of like Turkish and later like kind of calligraphic decorations you see in Islam. But in any case, it's big, it's lifted above you, and then looking down, and so the focus is upward. Now again, you do see the saints, you see Mary, you also see the royal or the emperors of the Byzantine Empire. And in this culture developing in the Byzantine Empire, as well as in the Catholic Western churches, we start to see the first icons associated with Christianity. And an icon is a picture of the sacred subject. In the case of Christianity, Christ, Mary, and the saints. When we talk about icons, we're talking about some image of the saints, some image of Christ, some image of Mary. When we talk about icon, we already talked about iconography, which is just a language around symbols that mean something. But in any case, that kind of gets us through Byzantine. But now I want to talk about Europe. We're going to pop back over that. That's the Eastern Empire, which again, Islam is born, sets up empires, caliphates, and then the Ottoman Turks take over, and then that kind of ends the Byzantine Empire, and the Eastern Church, it moves off as its own thing. In the West, Europe begins to develop. But let's talk about what happens before the development of Northern Europe, right before Roman expansion. And actually, I'm not going to get real far into these because I'm going to end this. This will just be part one of these slides, and there's not a whole lot more after this. But in any case, in Northern Europe before Rome, we see now. Sorry, I'm double checking my. Uh, my timing here, but it doesn't, I can't find it. In any case, I'll just try to work quickly. Anyway, Cheddar Man is, we've already talked about the Lascaux Cave and the Chauveau Cave in ancient times, but, kind of relegated toward as we look at the Neolithic, the Stone Age in Britain and Europe, I want to talk about Cheddar Man, which is the first Briton, or at least the oldest Briton, whose remains we actually have from 10,000 BC. Here's a digitally reconstructed image of Cheddar Man he was on the west coast of Britain. Now you see Briton. This is the word we now use for ancient people who lived on the British Isles. I'll talk about in a second that you should know the difference between the Britons and the Celts. But in any case, we see that. And then after 10,000 BC, as we move out of the Mesolithic into the Neolithic and, see cultures and stable societies developing in Northern Europe, we see one of the earliest widespread cultures is the Beaker people. And they're known as the Beaker people because of their pottery. So the pottery culture, all the way from southern Denmark and near like the Slavic states down to Spain and through Britain, you see we have found remains of this very similar type of cup, which is called a beaker, with a very, again, similar type of striation and decoration around the pottery. And so we have this sort of idea of a unified somewhat material culture, or somewhat unified material culture across Europe as we move through the Neolithic period. And then as we get through the Neolithic, the Bronze Age, and we move to the Iron Age, we actually start to see Celtic culture sort of appear. And this is where I want to talk about the Celtic culture, which today is sort of synonymous with Ireland and Scotland and like the Celtic fringe is what they call that, actually, in historical context. Actually, Celtic culture sort of started in the middle of these countries. But in any case, the Iron Age people of Europe is a way to think about the Gauls. And I'm talking about mainland Europe. Again, the people of the British Isles in ancient terms are often just called the Britons. The word for Britain, it comes from when the Romans encountered them, they had face paint and things on, and so they called them the painted people, or Britanni, which later becomes Britain and all stuff. But as we look back through history, the British Isles actually have their own cultures that develop separate from mainland Europe, and we call that the Britannic, or actually, well, yeah, it's mostly Britannic, although there's some overlap of the Gaelic and Goidelic, which is a Celtic thing. But in any case, for the most part, you can think of it like, there's the Picts, there's the Scots, there's the Welsh, and the English. Well, not the English in any way. They were just the British. The English don't come till later. In any case, they're their own thing. I love talking about this, if you can't tell. But then the Celtic culture starts to really show itself as this unifying force around what they call the Hallstatt Age. So we see the Hallstatt Bronze Age is from 1200 to 800, and then we move through all the different Hallstatt eras all the way up to about 500 BC. And this darkest area of it's actually part of Austria and Germany. That's Hallstatt. That's where the earliest Celtic cultures develop, and then it slowly spreads from there over the next 100 years. The next largest culture in Celtic history is the Latin culture, the Latin Core, which actually, or the Latin Core. Sorry, I'm just in any case. That starts around 450 and it spreads all the way to 50 BC, and that's when things change because Rome takes Gaul and stuff like that. But the Latin culture is a Celtic culture that really is centered around, I guess we say the first Latin object come from Switzerland, but it's all still on this like growing sort of trajectory from the center of Celtic Europe. But then the Hallstatt culture, like I said, that's Central Europe. And then just remember that the Britons at this time are different, although there is some overlap. Now, real quick, I'm going to end on this slide before we go, because I don't want my timer to run out and it crash. But I want to talk about, if anybody has ever heard the term Gaul, and I usually talk about this in class because most people have heard it before. And what you should know, I guess, is that essentially Gaul is the word used by the Romans to talk about Celts. Celts is it's a name that these people came up for themselves. Although really it's a term we apply to them that just is about where they lived and the time that they lived in. But when the Romans start to interact with these uh, Celtic tribes, they have their own word for it, and that is Gaul. And then actually, while all of these people are kind of considered the Gauls, the area that they specifically call Gaul is basically modern day France. It's right here, and that's why I put this little arrow here. So the Romans are here, and when they interact with people in this area, which is kind of their trajectory as they spread, they don't go very far north. They mostly spread this way. They called, and then also eastward, of course, towards this is Byzantium and all that stuff. But in any case, and their empire reaches way that way. But this is the area they call Gaul. It's also important to note that there are Celtic or Gaul cultures that actually make their way all the way into Turkey. Actually, there's an invasion of Gauls or Celts. I think they mostly call them Celts because they're not from France. They're from this area, Dacia and Thracia. They invade and they actually set up a little Celtic society in Turkey, which is actually called Galatia. If you remember that in your Bible, many of you have read the Bible, Galatians. They're the Celts that have actually moved into Asia Minor. You probably have lots of questions about that stuff. And again, I like to talk about it because they have different material culture. But at the end of the day, there's a whole nother course on all that stuff. But now, Celts start here. The Britons are over here. This is where the Gauls live. They're a type of Celt. That's what the Romans call them. Galatians over here. Okay, I'm going to end this here. That's the end of part one. Like I said, I just don't want my timer to run out. And I have had a bad habit of letting that happen. But in any case, that ends part one. We'll continue part two of the development of Europe in another video. Okay, thanks.